Hello, everyone. My name is Victory Brown, and I'm a user experience designer based in Nigeria, and I'm also an open source design contributor. But today, I won't be talking about open source. I will be talking about designing for everyone, the curb cut effects. It is using the curb cut effect to make a design that is universal, a design that works for everybody, despite your age, ethnicity, gender, where you base, and what type of device you use. Well, today's talk, I'll be highlighting what the curb cut effect is, who founded it, how it got started. I'll be talking about accessibility, what it is to design, and what it is generally, the different types of disabilities for web users, and how users with disabilities use and engage with your products, how to conduct interviews with disabled users, and finally, how to be inclusive and accessible in our designs. What is the curb cut effect? Well, generally, it is a small ramp which is built into the curb of a pavement to make it easier for people using pushchairs or wheelchairs to pass from pavement to the road easily. This is how it is recorded in the dictionary. But originally, it was founded in the 1970s by a scholar named Hale Zuckers. He was one of the members of the IML, and he came up with a curb cut to assist students or people with wheelchairs to access the campuses easily. He stayed in Berkeley, California, and they had lots of pavements, but with the use of the curb cut, it was easy for people with wheelchairs to move easily, go home, and avoid the road. Now, with time passing, the curb cut effect has spread out to a wide range of uses. It is used by mothers with their kids on chairs, used by car services. It's used, I'm sure you must have used the curb cut once or twice with your shopping carts. It's easy for movement. So over time, it has been generalized and has become a universal design. This is what the curb cut effect is. What then is accessibility and accessible design? Well, UX has used the term A11Y to describe accessibility. 11 is the 11 characters in between A and Y. And accessibility is the extent to which your products can be used by a wide range of users, users of different disabilities, even those that don't have disabilities. It is making your design open to everybody. Now, disabilities have different forms. We have temporal disabilities, situational disabilities, and permanent disabilities. Now, for somebody with a permanent disability, it means the person was born that way. You can come with a permanent visual impairment, which means you were blind from birth, or temporal. You had an eye surgery and you can't see for now, or situational, wherever you are, it's dark, you can't use your phone, you need the brightness. So those are situational disabilities for people with visual impairments. Now, designing for accessibility means you're taking into consideration diverse user sets, different people that come to your websites, you take in their needs and their frustrations, and you try to solve them digitally. Now, what are the different types of disabilities? As I said earlier on, we have visual disabilities. Now, these are users that suffer from visual impairments. According to the World Health Organization, there are over 285 million persons that identify with visual impairments, which means some may be blind, some may have color blindness, some may have other disabilities that affect their eyes and seeing for that moment. Now, how do you design for these people? How do you put in their needs into consideration? Now, for people with visual disabilities, you have to consider your font color, your font contrast, your layout, the font size. When you take these things into consideration, it means you're being accessible in your design, you're being thoughtful, you're being inclusive. Now, auditory disabilities have to deal with a certain level of deafness, which is being exhibited by the user. But people with auditory disabilities are not so much on the internet because most of the internet is made up of web, visual, and aesthetic content, which means there's more of write-ups and all that. But technology has advanced recently, and a lot of people are pushing more video content to the internet. We have more videos on YouTube, music videos, TV show, Netflix, and chill. So people with auditory disabilities now have to use your websites or have to use your apps. How do you put their needs into consideration? Well, for starters, the use of captions, closed captionings, subtitles. If you consider these features, it means you're being accessible, you're being inclusive in your design. Now, using the curb cut effect, the use of closed caption can work for anybody with auditory disabilities, whether temporal, situational, or permanent. For instance, you might be in a bar and you're trying to catch up with football content and everybody's, happy and making noise, and but you need to focus at that point on what you're watching. The use of subtitles, the use of closed captions can work. Now, for video content that are not necessarily in the native user's language, the use of subtitles can work for everybody. Now we move to cognitive disabilities. Well, cognitive disabilities are not so much on the internet because there are no guidelines that guide designers on designing for people with cognitive disabilities. Cognitive disabilities are more mental. It has to do with people with low attention span, people with anxiety. So to capture their interest, you need to make your website more focused. You have to work on your layout. Think of hierarchy. Put the most important information there to capture their attention. Use the latest fonts that are in relation or correlation to the web accessibility initiatives to guide users with cognitive disabilities. You can add features like restart, which means a user doesn't have to, fill forms over and over again whenever they come to your website. You can have like a save details feature so that whenever they come, it can automatically update their system. Also, the use of assistive technologies. Well, the use of assistive technologies is the way in which users with disabilities use your products in order to enjoy or have a good user experience. Assistive technology, rather, is a term given to assistive or adaptive and rehabilitative devices for people with disabilities. The use of wheelchairs are assistive technologies. They help people move about from one place to the other. Hearing aids help people with hearing issues to hear properly. Now, for web, there are assistive technologies that help users on the web, which are speech inputers like Siri. Hey Siri, open Apple Music, and Siri does it. That's a use of assistive technology. Now, Siri is used by different users, whether you have a disability or not. It's a feature that we all enjoy. There are other assistive technologies for the web, like screen readers, the voice messaging, and all that. These are assistive technologies that are being used by disabled users in order to help them enjoy or have a better user experience. Now, how do you conduct interviews for users with disabilities? Well, for starters, you adapt the interview workflow to be more inclusive. You send out a research question prior to the interview, asking these users what would be the most favorable approach to their interview. Would they want somebody else that they know to be close to them? Imagine interviewing somebody with autism. The person is not familiar with you. You would need to have somebody there that he or she is familiar with to make the person comfortable. Or You search for other interview processes that are more accessible to the user with disabilities. Next, you understand legal protections for users with disabilities. If you're not familiar with designing for users with disabilities, well, you need to check out the Americans with Disabilities Act, Standards for Accessible Designs, and the Web Accessibility Initiative. These are all programs designed to guide designers to design accessibly or inclusively for users of different ranges. Next, you deal with your bias. What are biases? Biases are personal um, thoughts that affect the way you think, or maybe based on your background, based on your experience, your ration to think in a particular way. You have to deal with it when designing for users with disability. Consider other interview formats. Now, for users that are disabled, let's say physically, that are not able to move from their house to your organization or where the interview is being conducted, it's advisable that you take into thoughts other interview formats like online interviews, send out questionnaires, you have a video call to make them feel more inclusive. Now you allow them bring their own assistive technology. Like I mentioned earlier, assistive technologies are those technologies that enable users with disabilities to interact well with your products. So you can allow them come with their own assistive technology. Next, you give additional time. To make them feel more included in your design, you have to go about asking them questions and make sure you understand these questions that you have asked. And if, for instance, you do not understand, it is advisable that you book another session to continue the interview, or you exceed the time, increase it for them to further explain themselves, explain their frustrations, and for you to further understand what they're saying. Now, remember, when designing for people with disabilities, you have to remove your assumptions. Do not assume that this feature will be useful for them. Always ask them, get to know their needs, empathize with these users to find out what their problems are. Next, how to be more inclusive and accessible in design. Now, for UX designers and all designers alike, you have to think of your audio and visual content. Now, for audio creators and video creators, think of videos, the clarity, think of adding subtitles, think of the speed. These are all ways to think of accessible designs when you're considering audio and visual content. What layouts are you using? What's the structure of your website? Does it conform with the Website Accessibility Initiative? Have you researched to find out what layouts would be good for this kind of users who you are designing for? Consider animation. What is the process in which your user interacts with your website? How does this screen move to this screen? How does this feature, what's the drop down like? What's the movement like? These are things that you need to consider when being accessible and inclusive in design. Considering your font size, color, and style. Some fonts are aesthetically pleasing, but they are not workable for websites. So consider fonts that are websites, how do I put it, that conform with your website or your brand, yeah, that are inclusive and accessible, that users with disabilities can see and still understand. You have to use more, check out your sans and your sans serif font styles, and color, your font colors, use colors that are closer to real life. Like red, for instance, red signifies danger, cancel. So whenever you have to deal with issues of not working, error, you know the colors that work, you know your font style. Now the structure and the layout of your website, does it conform with the Disability Act? Does it conform with inclusive designs? What structure are you using? What layout are you using for your website? Do users come to your website and are confused on how to go about their next action? These are things to consider. So for this to be workable, you need to conduct what they call usability testing. You need to gather a wide range of users with disabilities and those without disabilities to test and see what features are helpful and which features you should not put in your website. What is the readability like? All of these features prior to readability all arrange themselves to form a readable website. Is your website accessible? When I come to your website, how do I perceive it? Am I able to go about all of my tasks? Am I able to complete the tasks that I want to use? So these are all the things to consider when making an accessible or inclusive design. Well, I'm happy you stayed to the end of this talk, and I do hope you've gathered a lot to help you in being more accessible in your design, because design is going global. The world is going global and technology is taking place. People are becoming more digital. So in order to increase users, increase profits, you need to be more human and user-centered in your design. Being more accessible and designing according to website accessibility standards help you to be more inclusive and human-centered, which brings more users to your website, which increases profits and customers. So thank you for coming to this talk. As you are more inclusive to the needs of your users, you create a more accessible design for all users. Thank you.